All right, so everyone. So we are working our way through the halachot of Pesukei deZimra. We ended off last night talking about what happens if you are in the middle of Pesukei deZimra. Can you interrupt? Can you answer amen, etc.? So we saw, and there is no obligation to answer amen while one is in the middle of Pesukei deZimra. One does not have to stop. One is allowed to stop in order to answer. And we saw the last thing we said was that somebody was davening and it's going to interrupt his kavanah every time. He's going to stop and answer amen and then get back and figure out where he was. So then he's not required. And that's what he said here in Penena Alachai. He says, "Umishu machaven ka'oi b'pesukei deZimra ve'afsaka la'niyat amen tatzid et kavanato." Somebody who has the kavanah, and if you're going to stop to answer amen, it's going to bother you and disturb you. So therefore, he said, "Mutav she'amshich le'omar v'kavanah." Better you should carry on saying these pesukim v'lo yaneh amen, and don't answer amen. We'll talk in a few moments what you can do in order to avoid getting into the situation in the first place. So that's a separate issue, which is maybe more pressing. However, if one was in the middle of Pesukei deZimra and you hear the tzibur is saying kedusha, then you should stand up with your feet together and you should join them. You don't want to stand out as somebody who is a porish min hatzibur, somebody who's not together with what the tzibur is doing. Same thing, if they get to modim or baruch, you should bow down and answer with them. Okay, interesting question. It can come up sometimes, or something like that. Going on at the same time. So you're davening in a minyan and you're saying Pesukei deZimra, and you hear baruch or kedusha, whatever, from a different minyan. So they would say, you're allowed to not answer. You're allowed to just carry on davening where you are. That does not look like you are separating yourself from the tzibur, because the tzibur that you are with, you're davening. Okay, halachaya for the gabayim amongst us. If you should ideally not call up somebody who is you see somebody's in the middle of Pesukei deZimra and they're still davening, don't call them up to the Torah. If they're Kohen or Levi, the only Kohen or Levi, you can call them up. So obviously he can, if he has to get called up, he can go and he can say the brachot, but he should not go and start chatting with the Rabbi and asking for mishaberachs for this one and that one. Okay. You didn't know, the Rabbi didn't see, and you just called somebody up, and turns out they're still in the middle of Pesukei deZimra. What should they do? They should go up. Because of the kavod, the honor of the Torah, and the kavod hatzibur. Okay. Yeah. Pesukei deZimra, doesn't matter. It's yeah. Ideally, if you can finish the parak where you are, and then go on. But okay, when we get to Berachot Kriyat Shema, then it's going to be there's more of an afkamina between the different sections. Okay, so now, and this is a more pressing, and this is a very relevant question that comes up everywhere. But the heading is what should you skip over in order to get to Tfilah b'minyan? Right, and that could be in one of two ways. Either if a person came late, okay, or if a person didn't come late, as you mentioned, but you definitely at a different pace. The chazan is quicker. You aren't always able to say everything. So, a person comes late to davening and sees that Pesukei deZimra is nearly finished. So it's better to skip over certain prakim and skip over parts of Pesukei deZimra in order to daven with a minyan. But the benefit of davening together with a minyan is greater than that of saying all the words of Pesukei deZimra. The whole essence and the whole purpose, as we've explained this week, of Pesukei deZimra is in order to prepare oneself better for the tefillah, in order that it should be a greater, more auspicious tefillah, that you'll say. Better preparation, better kavanah, be more accepted. We know there's a large difference between davening by oneself and davening together with the minyan, with the power of the tzibur. And it's not right to give that up. Now, as I mentioned already, those who go according to the Kabbalah, so for all sorts of Kabbalistic reasons, would say even don't skip over anything, say everything in order, even if that means you're sacrificing tefillah with a minyan. But generally speaking, we paskin this way. And therefore, he says, "Lefichach, המאחל לתפילה מוטב שתדלג על רוב ברכות השחר, קורבנות ופרקים מפסוקי deZimra." So if it's really that extenuating, so he says you could even skip over certain parts of Birkat HaShachar, Korbanot, different parts of Pesukei deZimra, in order to get to Shmona Esrei b'minyan. We talk about Tefillah b'minyan, Tefillah b'tzibur. Many people have a misconception, right? When you ask people, what does Tefillah b'tzibur mean? So many people think that Tefillah b'tzibur means you answer Baruch Hu, or Kaddish, and Kedusha. All those things are what's called Dvarim Shebikdusha, which you need a minyan. You can't say Baruch Hu, Kaddish, Kedusha, any of these things if you don't have a minyan. I remember going back now a few years ago when we were at the height of the COVID epidemic, right? So there was a whole discussion. What do? You can't get together and you can't be in a minyan. Can you say Baruch Hu? Can you say Kaddish over Zoom? And all these sorts of questions. And again, the general halakha is no, you can't. You need to have a minyan together. You need to have 10 people in one place. But all that is Dvarim Shebikdusha, and all that you need a tzibur for. But that's not Tefillah b'tzibur. Tefillah b'tzibur is Shmona Esrei, and it's Shmona Esrei. It's the Tfilat Lachash, that everybody says they're individual silent Shmona Esrei, but you say it together at the same time. You're praying together as a tzibur. That's what we mean when we talk about Tefillah b'tzibur. So therefore, the question is, if a person is going to reach the beginning of Shmona Esrei, we'll see there are some poskim will say if you start at the time when the Chazan begins the Chazarat Hashatz, and that's also called Tefillah b'tzibur. Not everybody agrees. That's a little bit more contentious. But certainly, davening Tfilat Halachash together with everybody, that is called Tfilah b'tzibur. So that's what we're talking about. If you can get there, you're okay. So if you need to skip parts of Pesukei deZimra in order to catch up, so you can. However, certain parts you cannot skip. So Baruch Shamar Ashrei Nishtabach Lo Yidaleg, Kedei Shelo Lafsid et Amiratam. If you don't say Baruch Shama or Ishtabach before you've davened, so you can't say them afterwards. These were brachot that were established as part of the opening and closing of Pesukei deZimra. This is part of the preparation for tefillah. Therefore, if you don't say them before davening, you can't say them after davening. Once you're saying the opening bracha and you're saying the closing bracha, so you have to say something in the middle. It has to be something for which it's a chal on. And therefore, we say the most, if you don't have time for anything else, we say Ashrei, which is the most essential part of the Pesukei deZimra. וכן צריך להקפיד לומר לפני תפילת ברכת אלוקי נשמה וברכת התורה. Okay, so under really extenuating circumstances, you could be Birkat HaShachar, and you could say them after davening as well, but with the exception of Elokai Neshama and Birkat Torah. Those you cannot say afterwards. You won't have the opportunity to say them afterwards, so you should say them before, as well as obviously litatef talit and laniach tefillin. That has to be done beforehand as well. If you're going to skip everything and you're just going to say that, and you're still not going to have time. Okay, this would not be because somebody's davening too late. This would be because somebody came late, right? But in such a case, so then in that case, it would be better not to skip anything and just daven by oneself. As we said, if you're going in a position where you have to skip, so ideally you should do it so that you can daven together with the tzibur at the same time, i.e. the tfilat al-lachash. If you see that you're going to skip and you're going to say the Baruch Shama Yishtabach, Ashrei Nishtabach, and you're still not going to make it together with the tzibur, tfilat al-lachash, but you'll be able to start in time for the Chazarat Hashatz, okay, then ישתדל להתפלל חזרת השעת, שגם באופן זה הוא נחשב כמתפלל במניין לרוב הפוסקים. Okay, now an interesting question which comes up as well, or one more thing we'll just say, מי שנאלץ לדלג על פרקים מפסוקי deZimra, if you skip, do you have to make them up? Do you have to say the prakim after davening? So the answer is, אינו חייב להשלימם אחר תפילה, there is no obligation to say it afterwards. Tov she'ashlimam. Poskim right that it's good to say these prakim afterwards, still Pirkei Shevach, but nonetheless it's not required. So that's when it comes to Shacharit. What about when it comes to Mincha? Well, Mincha, there's not really much to skip. You're just saying Ashrei and you're going straight in. But Maariv, sometimes it happens, a person comes in late, the person doesn't know what time it was, they start early, and you come into Maariv. Are you allowed to skip, and should you skip it? So we find a difference between Shacharit and Maariv for the Sinyan, because we have the idea of smicha. This is not to do with Pesukei deZimra, it's to do with Birkot Kriyat Shema. But we have the idea of smichat geula latfila. Right? We say the bracha of Gal Yisrael, the brachot, the final brachot of Kriyat Shema are related to geula, and from there we go into tefillah. That's the Quran brachot tells us. So that idea of joining geula to tefillah is primarily by Shacharit. By Maariv we have it as well, but by Maariv it's not as critical. And therefore, if a person comes late to Maariv and he finds that the tzibur has already started saying the Shemona Esrei, so then the proper thing to do would be to daven Shemona Esrei together with the tzibur, Maariv. No, Shacharit you can't skip, you have to do it first. But in Maariv you would daven Shemona Esrei together with the tzibur, and then afterwards you would say brachot Kriyat Shema and Kriyat Shema, etc. That is that is the difference between Shacharit and Maariv for that matter. Okay. Finally, talks about in terms of if one is able to say, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. But if you know that you can say more, you don't have to say the absolute minimum, but you have to skip a little bit. Which part should you skip? Which part should you not skip, etc. So a person should try, if a person is in a situation, or you know your minyan, you know your chazan, you know that every day, you're going to daven and take a certain amount of time. So you can know from the beginning which parts you should skip and which parts you shouldn't skip. It's not necessarily just what goes in chronological order. You should go from the most important to the least important, as we said already, Ashrei, and the 5 prakim that follow on afterwards. That is the essence of Pesukei deZimra, and that's the part that one should endeavor always to say. One exception to this rule just mentioned is that on Shabbat, so on Shabbat you have Nishmat as well, Nishmat Kol Chai, which goes together with Yishtabach, and now we would not skip under any circumstances as well. So if a person needs to skip over Pesukei deZimra on Shabbat, be Baruch Shama, Ashrei, Nishmat and Yishtabach. Then we would say all the things, which maybe paradoxically, but all the things that you say during the week, because Tadir, B'Sheinot Tadir, those are more frequent, you would say those first, you have to skip, you would skip the special ones that you say on Shabbat, and so on and so forth. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezagot Yisrael, לפחד בעליהם תורה מצוות, שני מעדרי חפץ מהצדקו יגדיר תורה וידיר.